Okay, welcome back to the second in this series of biotech prep videos for the charity gift tournament. You should watch the first video if you haven't already, because we are straight up continuing from the last one as we talk about certain card slots that underperformed the last time. We are going to relook at all aspects of our deck, from the assets to the ice and finally the agenda suite. So right, let's begin with team sponsorship. So if you remember, the entire idea of our deck was to utilize forward momentum, and that works really well in HB, because HB have all these assets that are high, that have a high trash cost, and if they are left unchecked, you will gain extra clicks and extra credits, periodically throughout the entire game. So that was the original intent of why I was using team sponsorship and Maryland's. Not only do they enable the Jeeves Alliance, but they also give forward momentum, and that's really cool. The trouble is they're pretty marginal, right? Team sponsorship just isn't doing enough. Maryland's okay, but then you run into the other problem in that it dies to anti-asset decks. So the last time we played against a super rich Carbonesawu, that is one deck that can definitely shut down assets. They'll just keep jacking out to gain lots of money with Au revoir and then easily trash your naked assets. The other problem I identified is that they die to Armor Cooler as well. Typically, you leave these assets undefended, which means that your opponent can easily farm Armor Cooler counters on them. Once the runner gets up to 5 or 6 Armor Cooler counters, suddenly all your ice is pretty worthless. That is a very big problem, as it basically shuts down our ability to score in the remote. To counter this, we are going to wipe away all the assets, so we are not going to have any undefended remotes. That way we can adjust our game in the event that we are really up against an Armor Cooler deck. You have to keep in mind that we are in Charity Gift, a tournament where we expect an even faction spread. So cards like Armor Cooler at 1 influence will be very rampant. Not only will you see them in faction, but also out of faction. Anarchs love to run Armor Cooler as a supplementary AI breaker, and I'm sure there are some shapers who would love to run it as well. So that's something we need to keep in mind. To solve this, we are going to swap out those forward tempo HB cards for another HB card that gives us forward tempo but isn't vulnerable to being left undefended. That is Ginger City Grid. Ginger City Grid will always be protected because it's an upgrade, meaning that we don't need a separate remote to hold it, right? We can score agendas on Ginger City Grid, whereas something like team sponsorship and Maryland has to be in a separate remote because you can't put it in your scoring remote. So this is really great, and it kind of compensates for the fact that we are not gaining any extra clicks from team sponsorship, because Ginger City Grid gives us clicks in another way. It gives us free clicks for installing ice, and it also mitigates the cost of installing said ice. In a typical game, I would expect that Ginger City Grid will be able to construct a semi-decent 3 ice remote from the state of having 1 unrest ice. So this state on the left here, let me draw it. This is how a typical remote would look like when I'm playing Biotech Greenhouse, right? It could be anything. It could be end the run into Rashida. It could be end the run into Ginger. It could be end the run into a viral weaponization that I'm going to flip my ID and nuke your entire hand with if you don't contest it. So a lot of games I will open turn 1 or turn 2 with an end the run ice into something. If that something turns out to be a Ginger Grid, typically what will happen is that I'll snowball over the next few turns, accumulating a bunch of ice. Typically you won't need too many ice on the remote. It's not like I'm running a Surveyor deck. So in typical games, 2 ice usually does the trick, in which case Ginger Grid would have given me 2 extra clicks and 3 extra credits. That sort of gain is pretty good. I take it. It's enough to justify a forward tempo card, right? There are not that many other better tempo cards in the Jinteki faction anyway. The best part about this is that you don't feed Armor Cooler and you don't die to anti-asset decks like decks running Scrubber, Wizard, or Valencia. Next up, we are gonna revamp the ice suite. We were running Crick and Cobra before. The ice that start with C turned out to be not very taxing. Well, Crick kind of is, but I think a lot of runners can ignore Crick subroutine. Especially now that I'm taking the assets out of my deck, there are just fewer targets for Crick nowadays. So those are big problems. When I played against Phantom and his Au revoir Carbonesawu, he mentioned that an annoying ice that he was kind of afraid of was actually Aiki. So Aiki would have been very troublesome for him to break because it cost Ankusa 2 credits to pump and 6 credits to break all 3 subroutines. So 8 credits to bounce back a 1 credit res ice would have been hell for Phantom. So I was definitely considering running Aiki in my Biotech Greenhouse deck. The reason I do not like Aiki in this deck is the first subroutine. This could easily work against me. The reason is almost all of my games, this is a pure scoring deck, right? So I'm not trying to flatline. In almost all of my games, the final agenda I'll be trying to score as an Obo Carter, and usually I will try to score it under Kakugo's to ensure that the runner doesn't have 4 cards in hand whenever they access my Obo Carters. Aiki really doesn't help because it gives the option to click for 2 cards, which is more efficient than the standard basic action of clicking for a card. If they have an efficient way to break Aiki and mitigate the other 2 net damage, so for example, if they have an Armor Core with 3 counters on it, Aiki simply costs 2 to break, and then they can potentially draw 2 cards if they guess right on the side game. So this is really bad for me. Anyone who can break Aiki efficiently will just simply get free cards every time they run into Aiki. So this is why I do not like this ice. It can potentially backfire against me. Otherwise it'll be really good, which is kind of a shame. So as you can see here, a lot of the underlying theme is this deck dies to Armor Core. It follows quite it's not difficult to follow because a lot of Jinteki ice are low strength. So a huge swath of my ice like Thimble Rigs, Kakugos and everything are just basically blank the moment Armor Core comes online, and it's not very difficult to farm virus counters against me. Because of this, I need to use some anti-AI ice, and the best option that is available is actually IP block. The on-encounter effect will definitely slow the runner down and will massively help in my tempo game, and it also has the Crick trait of being cheap to res and high strength, right? Just like Crick, it's a very nice stopper ice, or rather a nice taxing ice to place on centrals that I can res even when I'm poor. So that's very important. The one downside of IP block is that it's NBN, right? It means that we are taking influence away from HB, which is a big problem since we are trying to enable the Jeeves Alliance. Jeeves is still a good card. We're still going to play Jeeves Model Baroids, so we need to kind of jiggle our ice influence around in order to have the 6 HB cards needed to play Jeeves. How I'm going to do that, we'll see in the deck list a little later on. But first, let's talk about another piece of ice that I'm going to introduce as well, Sadaka. I realize Sadaka has a lot of great benefits that justifies its place in my greenhouse deck. Obviously, it defends against indexing, which is always really nice. You don't ever want to lose on centrals. But more importantly, it also allows you to find key cards in a pinch. Sometimes I'm just looking for the agenda to jam in the remote. Sometimes I'm looking for the defensive upgrade in Marcus Batty. Sadaka gets me there and also trashes a key resource while I'm at it. If a runner doesn't expect this, they can have their entire 16 credits on Liberator accounts trashed, or a key asset like Net Mercure against Smoke. That would be absolutely huge. So Sadaka, a very flexible card, and even against an AI breaker, or some subpar AI breaker like Ngolo, it's actually pretty expensive to break due to its base 3 strength and 2 subroutines. So Sadaka, not bad at all. I'm gonna have include it in this deck. Finally, the agenda suite. The agenda suite is mostly there. I just needed to swap out the House of Knives because it was a liability the last game. I spent so many resources scoring it when I could have easily scored a viral weaponization that would have won me the game. Instead, the House of Knives tokens did basically nothing. So we are gonna change the 1 pointer to a 2 pointer, meaning that we are playing a 21 agenda point deck. Now, this is usually a bad thing, and you want to avoid playing more agendas than is necessary. Obviously, it makes it easier for the runner to win. But if you think about it, we are playing a rush deck. Having more agenda points is actually a good thing. Not only can we more reliably score 7 points early on, it also means that we are more likely to find a viral weaponization in our opening hand, which could lead to some really swingy opening turns if our opponents do not respect the threat of greenhouse into viral. So that is what we're going to hinge on. And yeah, this is the deck list. The one card that I haven't talked about that stands out, the one introduction, is Shipment from Tennin. This card was my tempo card of choice that I introduced, having leftover deck slots from removing all the assets. So why Shipment from Tennin? As I said, I'm looking for forward tempo cards that save me clicks and credits. Shipment Tap from Tennin does that, but it's pretty marginal, right? Normally, advancing agendas cost you 2 credits and 2 clicks to get 2 advancements on. Shipment from Tennin saves you 1 click. It costs 2 to play, and it costs 1 click. So you're getting a 1 click discount. 1 click sounds like very little, right? I tend to agree with that assessment. Saving 1 click is very, very marginal. But having played this biotech deck a bit, I realized that oftentimes I find myself with lots of cards in hand due to Rashida, or due to the fact that I'm spending time advancing agendas and not enough time to play these cards. Like, I always have leftover team sponsorships in hand. I always have leftover ice that I want to install. I often end up having spare hedge funds and celebrity gifts in my hand that I just don't have the time to play, because when an agenda is jammed in the remote, I need to absolutely score it the next turn. So with so many cards that require clicks and me not having enough clicks to use them, every click save could be huge. Shipment from Tennin, the click save could mean the difference between playing that hedge fund in hand and not playing the hedge fund. And that's a big difference. 4 credit swing, due to having a shipment from Tennin, we take those, right? Other benefits of shipment from Tennin are related to its fast advanced nature. It is yet another tool, besides Jeeves and Greenhouse, that allows us to score 4 twos from an unadvanced state, catching runners out and forcing them to run cards that they normally wouldn't run. So a taxing remote would definitely be of much greater use for us. They have to respect the shipment from Tennin threat, so even if they do access it, or even if we do show it off with celebrity gift, they'll be forced to continuously run archives every turn to turn it off, which is a nice benefit. Because they also have to respect the fast advanced threat. With double shipment from Tennin, we can score a 4-2 from hand. This is the reason we are running all 3 copies of shipment. You'll notice that I went down to 2 G's model Bioroids. I would like to have 3, but I cut 1 just so that I can run 3 shipment from Tennins to reliably draw 2 copies of it by the mid-game, allowing me to fast advance a 4-2 from hand, right? That is a very nice thing to have. For example, if the runner decides to trash all my G's Bioroids and counters my ID ability by playing Employee Strike, Shipment from Tennin is a nice out to score the next agenda, to trash the Employee Strike, and to, get an agenda out of the way, which is really nice. So a very robust deck with multiple ways to score my 4-2s is a very welcome thing, which is why I think Shipment from Tennin can shine in this deck. The one thing I'm worried about is aggressive runners, runners who are built to run every single turn, runners like Omar or Ken Tenma, that benefit from an uniced archives will be a problem to deal with. They basically shut down Shipment from Tennin, and my deck doesn't really have any counter to that. No breach domes to passively defend archives, and I don't really want to be spending clicks to install ice on archives just to keep Shipment from Tennin threat alive. So that could be a problem. Only one way to find out if it actually is. That is to bring this deck to JNet and give it yet another playtest. Let's see how we do this time. Today we'll be facing an ever-aggressive Kumalo deck, and right off the bat, we find ourselves in one of the hardest Maul or Keep decisions I've ever had to face. Pause the video and let me know if you will Maul or Keep, and your reasons why. So the trouble with this hand is that while it looks really good on the surface, having 2 Rashidas that you can jam behind a Thimble Rig, there's no way Kumalo will be able to contest either Rashida. The problem is, if you go for a turn 1 Thimble Rig Rashida play, Kumalo will simply run HQ, because Kumalo loves running HQ and trashing 0-cost operations from your hand. They're just going to get 5 points immediately, because you have a Nisei and a Juicy Obokatas sitting in your hand waiting to be sniped, and you can't reliably hope that you would draw an ice on your mandatory draw either. So I had to Maul the hand because it was too high risk. If I didn't draw an ice off the top, I would be forced to play Thimble Rig on HQ, rendering the 2 Rashidas useless, because that's 1 fewer and the run ice I can jam them behind. So yeah, that was a super hard decision. I was not happy with mauling that hand, especially given my new Mulligan hand, which doesn't even have an end run ice in it. So right off the bat, I have to take the most risky turn 1 play ever in Celeb Gift, showing a Batty, showing an Obokata, and then leaving my HQ unguarded with the Obokata ready for them to snipe. To be honest, I'm not all that phased about them sniping the Obokata from my hand really. It's a huge tempo hit, 4 net damage if they really want to steal it, and it's not like I'm gonna score the Obokata anytime soon anyway. I might have played differently if the Obokata was a viral web or Nisei Mark II instead. The real trouble is if they do see the Marcus Batty and decide to trash it. I wouldn't be happy. Thankfully, they actually dirty laundry R&D instead, not going for my Obokata, which I'm happy to see. Unfortunately, they do get a Rashida off the top of R&D, which is both a good and a bad thing. The good news is my mandatory draw now might be an ice that I can install with Ginger Grit. The other reason why I really did not fancy my opening play was that Ginger Grit is a 1-to-res upgrade. If they have a Yusuf or Data Sucker or any virus in their hand, they can drop it, collect a virus counter, and then run my Ginger to trash it for free. That would be ugly and disgusting. Thankfully, it seemed like they did not open with a virus, and they confirmed by discarding a bunch of bin breakers, meaning that they might not be running Yusuf at all. They trash paperclip. So very, very interesting deck my opponent is running. Kumalo, but with regular conspiracy breakers. I mean, I do admit, I play most of my Freedom Kumalo decks were with conspiracy breakers as well. But I really, really got lucky there because I could have easily lost a lot of momentum. If they trashed the Ginger for free, I would be put so far behind because my hand is otherwise utter shite. Instead, I'm in a position where I can snowball out of control because I find an IP block off the top of my deck. And now with a Rashida, I can potentially, just get a whole bunch of ice on server 1 for basically free. So yeah, very swingy, right? I could have been left in the dust, but instead, now I have the potential to stabilize. Of course, I fully expect my opponent to contest server 1 here, run and trash the Rashida at the very least, if not trash the Ginger as well with one of their viruses. With all the breakers in the bin, getting into my remote is not the problem. I think a stim hack into my remote would have been great at this point, but instead, it seems like they don't have stim hack. They're just setting up their resource econ. So I'm gonna get a huge boost here as I'm able to further defend my remote with a Fairchild 3. I'm saving the Anansi here because I know my central ice are shite. R&D is Sadaka only, which is not gonna help. And yeah, I could definitely use some big ice on central. So Anansi immediately goes on HQ. Don't forget, they still know I do have an Obokata in hand. So I need to defend HQ here. I put the Nisei in the remote, giving me the option to score it next turn by flipping my ID. So I'm gonna install the Thimble Rig here, and now I'm feeling pretty safe about my board. So yeah, I don't need to flip my ID at all because they didn't run last turn. I can shipment from Tennin the Nisei, saving my ID ability for another more rainy day. So that's the amazing thing about shipment from Tennin, right? Gives me an alternative. Instead of expending my one-use ID, I can just score an agenda just like that. Punish players who play very passively and decide to set up their board instead. Now my opponent plays very aggressively here but makes a mistake. Even though they had enough money to break my Anansi running to HQ, they ran into HQ before installing the David. They really should have installed the David first. That way they would be able to break Anansi for 3 credits for the David instead of 11 credits with the MK Ultra. So they were left very poor after that run. And even though they managed to steal the Obokata, that meant losing the David from their hand due to the net damage. So yeah, that was actually kind of a big risk. I wouldn't say it's a risk, but I think it's a bit of a misplay. But my opponent's idea to run HQ was completely correct. They knew that there were 2 cards in hand, one of which was an Obokata, so running HQ was a very obvious choice to get 3 agenda points. It's just that the David would have helped them out a lot. Right, we continue on the game. Since they didn't hit my Batty goes in my remote to defend the remote. We continue on the game. I'm trying to draw agendas here. Instead, I'm just drawing a bunch of ice and money. I guess I can't complain too much, but if I did find an agenda here, you bet it would be going in that remote unadvanced, and then I would, flip my ID to score it next turn. I'm definitely looking for an agenda at this point, but they play indexing against Sadaka. Okay, Ken. Okay, very, very good. Very good. We take this. We take those. Index me all you want. Right? It's not gonna matter. If you run again, I'm just gonna res the Sadaka. You don't have an AI breaker. I'm going to be able to reshuffle all the cards that you just saw. Wonderful. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Interestingly though, they do not run R&D. Does this mean there are no agendas on R&D? I don't know. Well, there are. I just drew into the Obokata. This is bad news. As I always say, you never want to score an Obo Carter unless it's the final agenda. I do know that they are running Employee Strike as the restricted card because there's one in the bin. I think it was sniped by the Obo Carter. So I don't have to fear Mad Dash into HQ. What I do have to worry about is my opponent having a turning wheel. Right now, that is a pressure card that can cause a lot of problems because my R&D currently only has a Sadaka. So once the Sadaka goes away, R&D is prime turning wheel farming target. With no defense, they can simply run it repeatedly every turn to chalk up turning wheel counters. I continue building my Ginger remote with a bunch of nasty ice. Gatekeeper is always nice to have on the remote so that on key turns I'll be able to res it to get the full 6 strength for the remainder of the turn. That will be very important on turns where I'm trying to jam an agenda through. Now we continue on the game and I still find myself with the problem that even though I'm running 6 agendas I want to score in the 6-4-2s and a fast track to fetch them, I'm not seeing any of them. So until I find myself an agenda, I can't actually threaten anything in the remote. Right? I can't even jam anything. I can't put the Ginger Grid in the remote because that's another upgrade region. And I can't put the Obo Carter in because I don't want to score it. So we are kind of left at a stalemate here where I'm not advancing my game, but my opponent is. They've now set up their Yusuf, which is their secondary barrier breaker, and are now starting to collect Yusuf virus counters and, you know, amassing a huge amount of cash. Those credits are pretty scary. My opponent can potentially threaten to run my remote twice in conjunction with a stim hack, and they would be able to steal the agenda in it. Single Nisei Mark II token isn't going to cut it. My remote isn't the most taxing in the world, especially given that they're running stim hacks, Davids, and all the good Anarch cards. Here my opponent's going to do something really interesting. Gonna spice up this game a lot. They are going to activate my trap card. They are going to run R&D with a Sadaka on it. So I've been waiting for someone to trip on my Sadaka, and this seems like the perfect opportunity for punishment. First, I get to look at the top 3 cards of R&D. This is really important as it allows me to get important scoring pieces into my remote. So if I draw a Nisei Mark II off the top here, I'm definitely going to keep it and jam it into my remote next turn. If I draw a defensive upgrade like a Marcus Batty here, as you see, I'm definitely going to take it. So I want to arrange it such that the Marcus Batty is on top. That way, I can draw into it and then plop it down in the remote next turn so that it can secure my remote. The next question is, what card am I going to allow my opponent to access? Because the second card I put on R&D is going to be the card they will access, because the first card is drawn by Sadaka. The second card will be the card they access. So between G's Model Bioroids and Kakugo, obviously I choose Kakugo as the card for them to access, because they cannot trash it with Kumalo's ability. Had I put Jeeves on top, they could trash it using the 2 virus counters on Yusuf. So that's completely fine. And then I'm going to fire the second ability, trashing one of the cards in my hand to trash one of their resources. I think a lot of people would have trashed the Earthrise Hotel in that situation because it has 2 power counters on it and 2 is bigger than 1, which is the number of power counters on the Turning Wheel. But Turning Wheel is the card that screams win condition for the runner, right? Because it's multi-access. Turning Wheel staying on the table allows my opponent to go for Hail Marys on centrals and pull wins out of nowhere. And you bet they will, because on 3 agenda points right now, my opponent could easily threaten a win by stealing 2 of my squishy agendas, the Nisei Mark II and the Viral Weaponization. We can't have that, so this is why we want to trash the Turning Wheel. I'm completely fine with letting my opponent draw the deck. As long as they are not getting multi-access, it's going to be very expensive for them to repeatedly run through my centrals. So after Sadaka fires, it goes in the bin. It's a 1-use trap, so I need to reinforce R&D, hence the new ice on R&D. And that allows me to draw into agendas. My opponent cannot R&D lock me, so I can draw into agendas, which I am looking to push through my remote ASAP. Note that my opponent has to wonder if they want to contest the remote every single turn here. Because I am the greenhouse, I can easily threaten 4 advancement on server 1, should they choose not to contest it. Now my opponent here goes for a turntable run on R&D, and this is always very scary when you are relying on Nisei Mark II to keep your opponent out of your scoring remote. Do I risk my opponent stealing one of my squishy agendas here and swapping it with my Nisei? Or do I let them through and save the Nisei for later? They are only getting a single access, but you'll never know what's the next top card of R&D. So this is a very tricky situation here. I also have to decide whether to res my Kakugo inside. I chose not to, and in fact, I used Nisei Mark II to end the run. The reasoning here is that R&D is taxing enough such that by breaking the Anansi on top of R&D, my opponent actually spent a lot of resources. It's 9 credits to break with MK Ultra. So more than half of their money went into contesting R&D. So by ending the run there, I cost my opponent some tempo. They no longer can freely contest my remote because they are now poorer, so this is a perfect time to jam the Nisei I just found into the remote and use Greenhouse's ability the next turn. With 6 ice staring them down on server 1, I think it's highly unlikely that my opponent would contest this. They could potentially stim hack into it, but even then, I still have backups. I have Marcus Batty into an end the run on the remote. I have a bunch of taxing ice. I don't have a lot of money. I'm certainly not going to res most of the ice, but depending on how my opponent configures their run, I think I should be able to keep them out by smartly resing the correct cards on the remote. So, yep, now it's time to pass initiative over to my opponent and let them decide for themselves if the remote is something worth contesting. The more cards enter a remote, the more you can be sure that the latest card is an agenda, because there are only so many upgrades in this deck. Each successive card is more and more likely to be a non-upgrade. So, yep, my opponent has to take that into consideration, and they have to decide between whether they want to set up their board or, in this case, stim hack my remote, click 1. With 18 credits, what am I to do? Well, I'm going to try to stop them here, and here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to take advantage of timing windows to fizzle out as much of their stim hack money as possible. So I'm going to res and end the run ice and gatekeeper, and then immediately fire Marcus Batty even before they encounter the ice. This ensures that they do not get a window to install the Black Orchestra from their bin, right? I do not want them to install Black Orchestra for free using stim hack money. So I'm going to fire both Marcus Batties here because the first one failed. We both bid 1. The second one passes. I bid 1. They bid 0. And I'm going to end the run before they get a chance to even install that Black Orchestra. Yep, if you don't believe this works, take out your latest copy of the timing structure of a run chart and have a look on encounter. Before the on encounter, that is when Black Orchestra triggers, there is a window, a paid ability window for me to res ice and or res other upgrades and fire said upgrades. So that's what I'm doing with Marcus Batty here. So the stim hack allowed me to fizzle to, I basically just denied 8 credits from their first stim hack. Now they tried to re-stim hack again, which is a really good play. Double stim hack almost certainly guarantees passage through the remote, except that I had a thimble rig on the third innermost position of the server when they had 8 credits remaining. So they have to actually break my thimble rig 3 times on the third innermost, second innermost, and the innermost position as I keep swapping it down and down through the remote. So because their best answer to thimble rig is actually Black Orchestra, they were 1 credit short of making it all the way through the server. 1 credit was the difference between me scoring this Nisei and them stealing the Nisei and getting to match point. That's an absolute heartbreaker for my opponent. But I'm not complaining here. That basically decided the game, because that cost them both their stim hacks and a lot of money, and it cost them a Nisei as well. They're now down to 1 credit. They can't even capitalize on this scoring window to run my centrals because they're blocked by Anansis and they don't have money to get through them. So that was a very game-changing turn right there. That was absolutely crazy. Going back to my win condition now, it seems like scoring the Obo Carter from my hand is an obvious choice. As much as I wish I could use the efficiency of Jeeves to get that job done, unfortunately against Kumalo, there is one runner you cannot leave a naked Jeeves out in the open against. Not only do you provide them an avenue for farming, Yusuf counters, but they can also just as easily trash Jeeves using said virus counters. So Jeeves is not an option here. that means that I'll have to spend the next few turns getting money so that I can install double advance the Obo Carter for the win. But with the Nisei counter available for me, it shouldn't be too difficult for me to score this agenda. Not to mention that now that I've moved my Thimblerick to the outermost ice at the start of my turn, they are basically not going to be able to afford breaking the same Thimblerick 6 times as it moves down the remote. So my remote is very secure here. You will also note how saving a gatekeeper for an important agenda score can change the game entirely, because they needed to install the Black Orchestra and pump it up to 6 strength in order to defeat the gatekeeper. So that's extra tax, and every single credit, as you saw in that remote run, makes the difference. So that's 6 strength gatekeeper plus the Thimblerick really pulling through for me, costing so little to res but so much to break for my opponent. So the Obo Carter's in the remote now. Next turn's going to be double advance, and the turn after that, triple advance for the game. I'm going to really ensure this score here by using Marcus Batty on my next turn. So next turn is going to be double advance plus install Marcus Batty. That should basically seal up the remote with 2 enderruns, one from the Nisei, one from the Marcus Batty. Let's see what sort of solutions my opponent has to this. They're still not on match point, so I'm not too worried. What I'm more worried about is them stealing a Rogue agenda and trading it for my Nisei token. That doesn't fly with me. But yeah, you can see that Kumalo's growth is kind of stunted. The runner that wants to run so aggressively can't really do so because the servers are also taxing, so they're not getting as many virus counters out as they would like. Back to me, I draw a viral weaponization here. Doesn't really make a difference since I'm going to double advance and install the Marcus Batty for insurance, and that should close out the game. Even though I'm only on 8 credits, I don't really see the need to res any further ice on the remote because the Thimblerick will just take care of everything. Right, and I also don't have to worry too much about Stim Hack. I've already seen 2 gone down the drain, so shouldn't have to worry about that anymore. So we saw this game was actually really swingy. It doesn't feel that way, but there were so many game-changing outcomes that rested on my opponent having or not having a certain card, having or not having 1 extra credit, including the first turn bold play where I had the naked Ginger out and they didn't have a Yusuf to contest and trash the Ginger. Now we see here my opponent finally finds that Armor Core. That's the Thimblerick and Gatekeeper breaker that should have arrived way long ago. Very unlucky for my opponent that their turtle ended up right at the bottom of the deck. But late is better than never. This allows them to actually contest my remote. This means that I can't actually keep my opponent out by shifting Thimblerick all the way down. They have more than enough credits to break the same Thimblerick 6 times. So that's something I didn't do. Instead, I'm looking at my Kakugo and I'm going like, okay, so Obo Carter's the agenda in the remote. All I really need to do here is to res my Obo Carter. So long as it doesn't hit an I've had worse, they are not going to be able to steal the Obo Carter because they won't have 4 cards in hand. So, yep, I'm just going to let them through all the way through and res the key ice here in Kakugo. Even though it's very cheap for them to break, it's 0 credits because they have Yusuf. But with the Nisei Mark II token, with the Marcus Batty, and finally with the 4 net damage from Obo Carter, I highly doubt they will be able to make it through this run and steal the Obo Carter. A friendly reminder that Kumalo only works on install and res costs. Because agendas don't have install or res costs, agendas cannot be trashed by Kumalo's ability. Therefore, even if my opponent accesses Obo Carter with fewer than 4 cards, they cannot do anything about it unless they have Imp installed or something similar. So, here my opponent realizes that they have been checkmated, and I bluntly tell them, yes, that's the case. It is an Obo Carter in the remote. It's not much you can do here, but one thing my opponent could do was to induce me, to force me to use the Nisei token here. Yep, if they force me to use the Nisei token here, they can make one last run on the central, and that might change things, who knows. I'm gonna rest the Marcus Batty here and play the side game. They lose the side game, so yep, that's game, because no matter what they do for the last click, I'm just gonna expend the Nisei Mark II token. Let's not waste time. We can call the game right here. That was a pretty solid victory, and I think it illustrates how robust my deck is and my ability to bounce back despite having some of my cards nullified. As we saw, Freedom Kumalo is quite the powerful card indeed, allowing it to contest all my HB cards. Ginger City Grids and G's Motor Borrows, normally too taxing for the runner to trash, are rendered kind of useless in this matchup. Thankfully, my opponent couldn't find an early answer to my early Ginger Grid, allowing me to build a ridiculous remote that snowballed out of control. But more importantly, I had other cards in my deck that could prop me up and more importantly support my agenda scoring route. If you saw the agendas I scored this game, you would see how things unfolded. My first Nisei was scored via Never Advance using Shipment from Tennin. You know, drawing suspicion away from my opponent. They didn't contest it. They didn't run, and I was able to get that going. Following that, the second Nisei was the challenging one because my opponent was very well set up and had lots of answers to my remote with lots of stim hacks and all their breakers. I needed a concerted effort to keep them out. A double Marcus Batty and a Star Ice in Thimble-Rig allowing me to defend my remote, and then the greenhouse enabling the score. That paved the way for my final agenda score. The Obo Carter was protected by my Nisei Mark II token, as well as a third Marcus Batty behind a Kakugo that provided the net damage needed to also defend the Obo Carter. So you can see how my deck gels very well together. So many moving components, and not all of them will be useful, but if you can manage to find the right ones and apply them in the right ways, you will be able to keep your opponent out and get those agendas going. At that point, it's really a question of whether your opponent is able to close out the game on centrals before you win. And in this game, my opponent couldn't really, because after I used Sadaka to trash that all-important turning wheel, those single accesses on centrals just don't cut it. That's about all the practice I'll get for this biotech deck until the actual charity gift tournament itself. I have no idea how it will go, but given the diverse field of runners that I'm expecting, hopefully the robustness and diversity of agenda defense and win conditions in my deck will help to fend off the competition. I will probably need to bring my A game against all the good players up in the UK. That's about it. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back in the next video, hopefully with some reports on how charity gift went. For now, happy net running. Ta!